Good. And I want to start explain this a little bit, right? I want to pick up a thread from last time, but I want to wait until Steen gets here before we do this, because remember the issue of intensities came up, and I gave Steen an answer, and afterwards I was less and less comfortable with my answer. So, and then like less and less comfortable to the point that I thought, wait a minute, I'm just wrong, right? So I emailed a friend of mine. We went back and forth and sort of sorted this out a little bit. But again, it was so Steen's question. I'm going to wait till he gets here before we do that. Okay, and explain a little bit what we're going to do here. But these were all the concepts that came up. When people generate concepts in Deleuze that are not in difference and repetition, and so what I want to do is put them together and talk about each of them, right, relative to difference and repetition. Okay, and I made up this chart for two reasons, right? One is it shows with the various works, I'll explain this, right? Various clusters of concepts, right? And then how they relate to difference and repetition. Then at the end we'll talk about ethics and morality, right? So I want to show that. And the other thing is I wanted finally to be able to like make up something that Mila couldn't actually copy down just like that, right? So, and apparently for once succeeded, right? She says, I don't know how to put this in. So in any case, my life feels complete. All right. So we have difference and repetition, right? Now let me just I'll tell you what's on here. We're going to start here and actually work our way around this way. Okay. Chronologically, it goes the other way. It's conceptually just going to be easy to see if we go this way. Okay. So let me do chronologically. We'll probably get to talk about time a little bit, right? And the B is for the Bergson book, right? The discussion of time comes up primarily in Deleuze's book on Bergson, okay? Right? Then there's affect, right, which comes up primarily in the Spinoza book, right? That's the S, right? There's a whole cluster of concepts. We're probably going to spend probably a good bit of our time here, right? They come up in Anti-Oedipus. And then there's two sets of concepts that come up in 1,000 Plateaus, right? Rhizome and the smooth and the striated. And I did not write the dates down, but just to get a sense of it, right? The Bergson book is around 1966, I think, right? The Spinoza book is 68. Difference and repetition is 68. So these are leading to this, okay? And then Anti-Oedipus is, I think, right around 1972, right? And then I think it's 1980 that these come out. So these are before difference and repetition, and these are all after difference and repetition. Okay, but they all, you know, what I said before is one way or another, all of this stuff comes out of the concepts developed in difference and repetition. So I'm going to talk about each of them. Right, spent probably the most time here, partly because there's a cluster of concepts that people asked about, and partly because this requires a good bit of background. Alan.
I didn't get why you have 1,000 Plateaus twice.
Oh, because there's distinct concepts, whereas these are going to all be related to one another. Yeah. Okay? So these are distinct concepts that I want to spend time on each. Here I want to sort of build a whole set of concepts in their relation to one another. Okay? That's the only reason. Right. Good. Now, first, before we do anything more, do you see this, right? Does it make sense? Anything we want to ask about this? Anything that needs to repeat? We're good at the moment. Okay? Okay. All right. Start with the smooth and the striated. In 1,000 Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari, what they said, they call it 1,000 Plateaus, but they have a bunch of what they call plateaus, which are like, in a way, you could call them short essays. Each of which uses different sets of concepts, deals in different fields, but all have internal relations. They say that you can read those in any order you like. They call each a plateau. And that's probably true, actually, because rarely does one build on something that happened before. So one of the plateaus is about the smooth and the striated, and one of the plateaus is about rhizomes. In fact, the opening plateau, probably for their work together, that's the concept people probably are most familiar with, the concept of rhizome. All right, and so we'll talk about what that is. Okay, but first, the smooth and the striated. Right? And looking at the smooth and the striated, it refers to different kinds of spaces. Okay, Alan, if I just use this little area here, is that okay? Okay?
Yeah, yeah.
But please keep it smooth.
No, it's going to get striated, right?
Testing.
Hey, come on in. I was waiting for you. Very good. So we will put this on hold for 1 minute. We were just about to jump in. I just explained what the chart was, okay? But I want to come back because you had raised the question last time about the relationship to virtual and the actual. Can anything happen to virtual that doesn't reflect the actual? And I mentioned that after our discussion, I got less and less comfortable with my answer, right? And then I realized, I'm probably just wrong about this, right? And so I emailed my friend Dan Smith, who spent his life studying Deleuze, and we had a set of emails back and forth, right? And decided you were certainly right, right? So, so you get tenure at Purdue. But I want to explain where the discomfort came from and why, and I was trying to work with examples, right? So, do you remember last time we were talking about the virtual and the actual? And Steen asked the question, could there be a possible change in intensities in the virtual that has no corresponding change in the actual? And I said I thought there could be, and I tried to use the example of a long-term friendship, where there could be some subtle change in intensity in the virtual that doesn't have a corresponding change in the actual. And as I was thinking about it afterwards, I was thinking, I'm imagining two friends together, right? And I'm imagining some subtle change, and I'm thinking, there's got to be something like when they're together, right? Maybe as they're conversing, maybe the pupils aren't as dilated, right? Don't get as dilated as much. Or there's a different galvanic skin response, right? There's some little change somewhere, right? In the actual that's reflecting the change in the virtual, right? And as I thought about that, I thought, there's probably something happening in the actual, as subtle as it might be, to reflect what's happening in the virtual. Okay? So, and I said the more I thought about that, the more that seemed to be the case. You couldn't have a change in the virtual without some change in the actual. And so when I emailed Dan, he actually liked it to the galvanic skin response and the people that I said, yeah, there's something like that. And he said he thinks, Deleuze says at one point, the virtual is no wider than the actual, okay? And what he takes that to mean is that nothing can happen in one space that doesn't somehow have an effect in the other, okay? So, all of it, and he gave he has this penchant for weather examples, right? Which don't do it for me as much, right? But he used a couple of weather examples which I would be happy to relate to you, except I didn't really get them all so well, right? He's meteorologically more advanced than I am, right? But in any case, I mean, the idea was it does seem, Steen, I think that you're right, that the virtual, any change in the actual, we know changes something in the virtual, but any change in the virtual will have some corresponding change in the actual. Something, it's going to give rise to something, however subtle. Okay? Right? And then we don't worry about questions of transcendence and things like that. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Right? Okay. Good. I wanted to make sure we were clear on that because I said, just afterwards I kept thinking, I just didn't like, because something was bothering me, right? And this is the kind of thing you lie in bed and you stare at the ceiling and you think, and then I started running examples to myself, right? And then that's when I started to think, no, there's got to be a change to the actual. Good? Okay? Good. I want to make sure we got to that. Okay, so now swing back to smooth and striated, and I get to striate this little piece of smooth space, right? So.
No. The other.
Oh yeah. I did that last time. Thank you. Because I came and I wiped the board off, and then one part stayed, and then I used a little water. Right?
Water.
Yeah, and it did. I just a little corner. So what if water will help? Right? And it didn't do anything. And I thought, well, there are these chemicals downstairs, and I just thought, Todd, just don't make it worse, right? Whatever, somebody knows how to do this, and it's not you, right? So I left it up there, and my aunt took care of it. So thank you. I guarantee I'll make that mistake again today. Okay. Okay. Smooth space. Okay. All right. Smooth space. Right. Imagine it this way, right? You have a space, right, that nothing's on, right? And yet what you're trying to do is create, let's say, irrigation lanes so that water can go through. Okay? So what you do is you create striations. Okay? That's to say, right? You make, and this is literal, right? You make cuts, right, in the smooth space, right, in order to direct the water so that it goes in certain places as opposed to others. Right? So, in a smooth space, right, when there's rain, there's no particular place it will go down. If it's a really smooth space, right? But any striations that are created, right, will force it to go in certain places and not others. Okay? Right. So you have a smooth space, and in contrast, you have a striated space. So I want to take this idea and put it slightly differently. Right? In a smooth space, there aren't any particular ways in which the water is going to flow. In a striated space, there are particular ways in which the water is going to flow. Now, take that image, right, and switch it over to the image of the infant brain. Right? We talked about the infant brain. And the infant brain is a smooth space. Right? It isn't anything in particular. It doesn't go anyways in particular. But as you cut through with a habit, you cut through with experience. You start carving spaces, right, in which, right, the synapses connect some ways and not others. And what do you have? You have a striated space. Right? And with the infant brain, you have a literally striated space, right? I mean, that's the space of the actual neurons connecting in some ways. So you get striations in that space, right? So, right, a smooth space, right, would be a virtual space. Right? A striated space is going to be an actual space. Right? And the striations can go various ways. I mean, they don't have to go this way. They can cut it all kind of different ways. Okay? But bear in mind that, and this is going to be, right, we'll remember this from difference and repetition. You can striate the space, but the smooth space is still there, right? It doesn't go away, right? And so it's possible to re-striate that space in some other way. And the reason you can re-striate that space in some other way is because in a striated space, the smooth space is still there. Right? That's to say, right? In any actualized space, right, the virtual space is still there. It can be actualized in other ways. Right? But once you, and this, again, what I'm doing is I'm talking about stuff that we talked about before, indifference and repetition, but I'm seeing how it operates in the new concepts. Okay. Once you striate a space, it's not the same smooth space as it was before. If you're going to re-striate it, right, you're going to start from this kind of space. Now, one might say, well, can't you just move backwards, right? Can't you just erase everything, and then you're back with your, right? But that's not how history works, right? Once you striate a space, right, the smooth space is still there, but if you're going to re-striate it, you've got to re-striate it starting from the striated space that you already occupy. Okay? So, right, if you want to, right, move from this, right, and right, say send the water out that way, you've got to start from that space, recut and things like that. Exactly as what we talked about in doing conversational work. Right? Once you achieve a certain actualization, that restructures the virtual, and it restructures the virtual in such a way that the virtual is still there, but it's not the same virtual you had before. So if you're going to actualize something new, you have to start from that virtual/actual space. Okay? So I think one of the reasons I wanted to start here was this maps really closely onto the virtual-actual distinction, right? The smooth and striated space. Right. Now let me stop before anything else. Are we okay? Well, I'm just going to take one at a time. Okay? We good on that? Okay? Alan, were you the one who asked about smooth and striated? Who was? Who?
Oh, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I did. And this son actually.
Yeah. So Alan, does this feel comfortable?
It's very good. And you see, there's another example from work in the brain, Russian psychologist Alexander Luria.
Mm-hmm.
He studied those who have been hit by a grenade example of the virtual is still there, and if you take point of departure in the actual, you can change the virtual. So it just came to think of that. It could be an example of that as well.
Yes, yes, and you can actually see it. Listen,
No, that's fine.
yeah, you can see it in other animals, right? So, for instance, right, there are, like, if you take like I think it's a centipede, could be a millipede, I'm not sure, but you take a centipede and it's a certain kind of beetle, and you cut off one of the legs, right? What will happen fairly quickly, it'll stumble for a little bit, but fairly quickly it will figure out, right, how to move, right, in a way to compensate, right, and it moves almost just as smoothly, right? So, and the idea is what's happened is it's rewired, it's rewired its engagement with the environment, right, so that it has the ability, right, to now navigate as it did before, to engage with the environment as it did before, but it engages differently, right, because it is structured differently, right. And that example, by the way, Merleau-Ponty. Just okay. All right. So we have the smooth and the straight, right? The rhizome. Wait, good. Lesson. Yeah.
So can we take that metaphor and take it into social life as well? Smooth and straight.
I think so. Are you thinking anything in particular, Lesson?
Well, everything. There are things we do here and we don't do. There are certain ways we act and don't act. There are, in one way, there are striations in this room.
Yeah.
That we all follow. That takes the social life into certain directions and not into others.
Yes. Yeah. But now I want to be
like norms or something.
No, they are. No, that's true, right? But I want to bring this closer to smooth and straight, because it's not that we striate space differently as we move to the different environments. In other words, say you and I, right, in our interaction here, right? It's not that we then re-striate the space when we're outside in social life, right? Or re-striate it again if I were in your class, right? Because each of them has each of those spaces has their striations, right? So that's not a matter of re-striating, right? But here's an example of re-striating, right? Let's suppose, right? Okay, I'll give you an example. I went out to do the bathing this morning, right? And when I went out to do the bathing this morning, everything it was like there was a lot of waves and such, and it was fine. And I thought, well, I'll go a little bit further and feel the waves a little bit more. And I did, at one point, took a step, and then there was this undertow, right? And it sort of dragged my feet, right? And then I thought, okay, it's time to go in. But what I thought is if I stay out here much more, I might wind up in Wien, right? And now what would have happened is you would have all walked in, right, to a space that you couldn't work with the same striations you had before, right? So one could imagine everybody sitting around, right, saying, okay, look, Todd's in Wien, right? So how are we going to run this thing, right? And then what happens is this becomes a smooth space, right, that you will re-striate, right, in the ways in which you form, and very quickly form norms and ways of going about things. That would be re-striating the space.
Yep.
Okay? See.
I was just curious by something Lasse said.
Yeah.
Because he said there is the strided and smooth space is a metaphor, and very often in Deleuze, and when he's writing with the Guattari, he's always saying this is not a metaphor.
Yeah.
So just wondering, would smooth and strided space does he use metaphors? Is it always he doesn't use metaphors? Could you say something about that? Because it's a little bit. Tricky sometimes.
Yeah, and he says that too about machines. I'm not machine. When I talk about machines, these are not metaphors, right? When he talks about it, there are certainly places where you can see it literally, right? You can see it literally in certain spaces, right? I would say that this example we keep coming back to the infant brain is actually a literal example. There are actual striations that get created, right? Those are the synaptic connections, okay? So on the one hand, right, I think it would be right to say that it's not a metaphor, right? But I think the proper thing to say is it's not solely a metaphor. And the reason is that you keep similar images. This is why this is so essential, right? That similar structures are occurring in the discussion in different places. And because that's happening, right, then I think you can see some of these concepts doing not just literal work, right? But metaphorical work, in other words, showing that kind of structure in different environments, right? So although they periodically insist that these things are not metaphors, the way I would take Esteem is they're not only metaphors, right? They often try to apply it literally, right? But we can see how this would be applied, right? In say with the idea of norms, right? So I think that, and I don't think that that it's just that okay, this is literal and this applies to just the phenomena we're talking about, and has nothing to do with any other phenomena. Because once you begin to see that they're seeing other phenomena in the same way, then what was literal in some places can become metaphorical in others. See what I mean? Yeah. Well, but you're right, they do. And when I talk about the machine, I want to take up their literal idea. It's not, it is a machine. They really mean that.
Because they're very insistent on it.
Yeah.
And they mention it very often.
Yeah, well I think because what they're trying to do is try to show that it's not just this, it's not just that we're using images so you can think about reality generally, but you can look in particular places and see these images actually being instantiated, right? I think that's what they're trying to get at, right? But I think it would be pressing a point to say that there hasn't, that this moves and striated, although it maps really neatly onto the virtual actual, right, which we can use in many places, it would be pushing a point to say, well, yeah, but it doesn't have anything to do with it because it's not a metaphor. Right. Okay, so now rhizome. By the way, let me ask you: do people know what a rhizome is?
No.
Eh? Hello.
Grass.
Isn't it the roots of a mushroom? No, it's called
Grass.
Grass is a kind of rhizome. Right. There's in the southeast where I live, right? There's a plant called kudzu, right. And it's a rhizome.
Kudzu.
Kudzu. You know kudzu?
No.
No, I mean it's. I think
So
it's
it's a great example.
right? Trust me. No, but if you look up, if you ever said Google kudzu,
But
right?
nettles have rhizomatic.
I think that, yeah.
Brandnetter.
Yeah, I mean, there are grasses that have it. Kudzu has it, right? There's sort of nettles that.
Stingnettles.
Yeah, but
ginger?
Ginger.
is ginger a rhizome?
Yeah, it'll start sprouting in all kinds
Yeah.
of directions. You can see it if you leave it on your kitchen counter for too long. It'll start growing in weird directions.
Okay, good. Yeah, that would be the same, right? Ginger. So the contrast here. Okay, hold on. Hey, I ain't got much more to work with. It's with a tree.
But you're now restriving.
Right. Okay. Right. A tree in English, a tree is, we use the term arboreal, right? What would be? I bet the Danish is not far from that because I think it's technical.
We have a word in Danish, arboretet. It's på en planteskole. Yeah, we call it arboretet. It's an arboreal place where you can buy trees.
Okay. Oh no. Right. Right. But when Deleuze and Guattari use it, the idea of the arboreal is you have a particular root system, right? And that root system gives rise to a particular item, right? Going from the roots up to the top of the tree. Okay? Right. And anything that's rhizomatic, right? Any plant that's rhizomatic, right, is going to, all right. Right? Things can spout from anywhere, right? So if you ask, where's the root, right? There is in a rhizome no particular root. Okay. Anything can be a root for something else, but there isn't a particular root. Right? Which is to say, right, it's all middle. Right? And they'll use this. So they use the term milieu. It's all milieu. It's all in the middle. Right? And so the idea is, right, in a tree, things can only go in a particular direction. Right? They can only go from the roots, right, up, right, through the trunk, right, out into the leaves, right. And the contrast with the rhizome is things can emerge from anywhere. You don't know where they're necessarily going to emerge from. They don't have to happen a particular way. Right? Al?
In Danish, we have this, what do you call it, skvallerkål, their root system, you don't know where the center is, and it goes in every direction. In English it's called good weed.
Good weed.
E-U-T.
Okay.
Skvallerkål is an example.
Yeah, and all of those they'll have this structure.
Yeah.
And what Deleuze and Guattari are interested in, right, is this structure in contrast to this one, right? But now why, right? Right. You can see this structure can yield only a certain identity, right? And it can only happen in a certain place, right? And we say in a certain way, right? And cover a certain amount of space. This can grow out in any different direction. It doesn't have a particular foundation. It's where it can grow from does require that there already be, right, the rhizome. In other words, the rhizome doesn't appear out of nowhere, right? You don't have this and then all of a sudden one of these, right? So the actual rhizome is necessary, right, to give rise to more actual rhizome. But that there is no particular place and no particular way in which a rhizome must grow, as opposed to this. Now, you can think here also about, if we're thinking in terms of the history of philosophy, right, that most philosophies are like this, right? They start with a foundation, right? And then they try to build the foundation, right? And you can see it in Descartes, you can see it in Kant, you can see it in many places, okay? What Deleuze and Guattari want is a more rhizomatic structure, right? They want to see if they can think philosophically in a rhizomatic structure. So what they do, and remember I said this is in 1,000 Plateaus, is they have different plateaus, right? Some of which grow from some of which grow from other, but there isn't any particular one, right, that is the foundation out of which they, everything else must grow. So, right, and this is by reading, they put the concept of the rhizome at the beginning, because in fact this reflects the structure of the book, right? The book is supposed to be, to have a rhizomatic structure, okay? Where things interact and intersect depending on your reading, but there isn't any particular way in which you're reading. Obviously it's got to be published a certain way, right? They can't publish it like a rhizome, right? I think they want to encourage we might say a rhizomatic reading, right, of 1,000 Plateaus. Right. Okay, now, having seen this distinction, right, you can also see the influence of difference and repetition in this, right? That in what they are, in the view they are endorsing, doesn't have to be one thing. It can be many different things, right? It can be different things in different places, right? And it has to grow from somewhere, but there isn't a particular thing a particular schema, right? That you read off the identity that it has to be. Okay. Now let me stop. Okay, here. You want to linger over this? Yes. No. Good. Okay. Okay. So, I think I was the one who did rhizome, right? Did I suggest rhizome? Did anyone suggest I suggested rhizome?
You did.
I just suggested. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. So is this good, Todd? Yeah. This is good. I'm good. Okay. All right. So good. Sorry, that was uncalled for. Okay. Anti-Oedipus, right? Now, to begin to approach these things, these concepts, I've got to talk a bit about Anti-Oedipus as a whole, because Anti-Oedipus is an intervention into a particular context in France, right? At the time, dominated by particular discourses, right? So it's good to have some background before we get into all this. At the time, this is I believe it's 1972. France is dominated in many ways. The intellectual discourse is dominated by two currents, right? Psychoanalysis on the one hand, and Marxism on the other. Right? This is the first extended book that Deleuze and Guattari write together. Right? Guattari was a Marxist. He worked in a psychiatric clinic, but his work was very political, informed in some ways by psychoanalysis, but not really comfortable with it. Right? And so what happens when they get together is that they challenge the dominant psychoanalytic conception that's right in the intellectual culture. But they challenge it not by trying to refute its concepts, but taking the concepts that are characteristic of psychoanalysis and reworking them, right, so that they all look completely different when they're done with them, right? And central to that is the concept of desire. So, let me talk about the concept of desire a little bit, right? And then we can see the changes that are made, right? And in order to do that, it's probably worth having sort of that traditional Oedipal story in our heads, because Lacan's going to do a revision of the traditional Oedipal story, right? So, let me ask, does everybody know the traditional Oedipal story? Yes? No? Give me a shake of the head and nod. Yes?
The traditional.
The story of Oedipus. Helen, not so much.
Oedipus, yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Good. But I mean, in Freud, right? But Helen, you're not so comfortable, so it's fine. No, I want to make sure we're all comfortable with it. So let me say a little bit about this, okay? Was it?
I think I know.
But this is a Freud story,
No,
not Sophocles' story, but Freud's story. Not so much.
I don't.
That's fine. Look.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, good. Okay, so, right, here's the rough idea, okay, right, of Oedipus, right? And I'm going to tell you the story. Right? It will not sound, as I tell you the story, as though I'm giving it my full endorsement, okay? But I'm not going to tell you anything that Freud didn't say, okay? So,
But that's only because you're in denial or something.
yeah. You only say that because you're projecting your own feeling of incompetence, right? Okay. So there's the oral stage we don't have to worry about. Then there's the anal stage, right? And then there's the Oedipal stage, right? In the Oedipal stage, what happens is you have the kid, always the boy, because the boy is the only one who matters, right? The boy, right, discovers that mom's is a lot more attractive, right, than he had thought she was, right? And so attractive that it would be neat, right, if me and moms could get together, right, and ride off into the sunset, right? But there's a problem, right, and that problem is dad, right? Dad seems to stand in the way of the envisioned happily ever after, right, scenario, right, that I have in my head. So it would be, like if Dad were not on the scene, that would be great, right? It would be neat to do something about Dad, right? As they say in the Italian, right, in the mafia films, if Dad could get whacked, right, that would be great, right? Problem, right, is of course that we know Dad is big and I'm little, right, and that's a problem, right? And Dad can fix it so that I can't. I'm still in Freud, right? Does anybody taking issue with this, right? That Dad can fix it so that I'm not able to realize my fantasy of riding off in the sun. I mean, I can ride off in the sunset, but I can't do anything like when we get to the camping site, right? And you know this, right? So this is what can he do? He can castrate me, right? And so I, as the kid, worry about castration. And not only do I worry about it, right? I worry about it, right, because I have evidence, right, that Dad is willing to do this, right? So I look at my sister, I look at moms, right? Yeah, they got out of hand, obviously, right? Because Dad whacked, he cut them. And the son's thinking, I don't want to look like them, right? So I've got this fantasy. Now what do I do with this fantasy? That I got to put it someplace that even I can't find it, right? Because Dad's going to know, sooner or later Dad's going to know what I'm thinking, right? And so I have to put this somewhere, I can't find it. And so I put it somewhere, right, that is inaccessible to everybody, including me, right? And that is what Freud calls primary repression, right? And that's the creation of the unconscious, okay? Hey. We were just creating the unconscious.
Okay.
Okay. So, right, this is primary repression. You create the unconscious. But what it means is that there's a fantasy in the unconscious which becomes guiding for everything else that the kid does, right, from there on. Okay? I'm gonna put this another way, right? That there is, not the whole story, right? But just this one part, right? That human beings are fundamentally characterized by a desire that can never be fulfilled. A desire that can never be fulfilled. You can come to terms with it one way or the other, right? But you can never ultimately fulfill that, right? Put this another way, right? Don't worry about it. Right? It's a desire. Our desire is fundamentally characterized by lack, right? By something that cannot ever be satisfied. Right? And this is one of the reasons, I mentioned this to the staff before, but this is one of the reasons that Freud says, and I think it's Civilization is Discontents, but I'm not sure, where the project of psychoanalysis, right, is to change neurotic suffering into common human misery, right? Right? And you don't get better than common human misery because we are fundamentally characterized in psychoanalysis by a lack, right? And Lacan takes this structure up. Now he works with it slightly differently, right? He reads the Oedipal complex slightly differently, right? He reads the use of this in French, right? Is the Is the hat over this one? Does the people know? The little hat?
Yes, it does.
Is it this thing? What? It's not the hat, is it? You know the hat,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so there's something over that letter. I can't remember what it is. Does anybody know French?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the
Like this way?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so good.
That's the accent of.
Yeah. Okay.
pointing towards the grave.
Okay, good. Okay. So, right. The name of the father, right? The no of the father. Okay, the father's no. That's the, right? And Lacan's right, brings these together by assuming the father's name. That is, say, going into language. Okay, that's how you resolve the Oedipal complex. Right? So you resolve the no of the father. No, you can't have the mother. Right? By assuming the name of the father. Right? And in French, they're both pronounced the same. You can't tell the difference in pronunciation. Right? They're both the nom terre. Right? And so Lacan uses this, right, to bring in a sort of linguistic component to this, right? And let me just, to close this bit of it down, right, let me just say, I've been studying philosophy for 30-some years, and I have never seen one person run so far with a small pun, right? Lacan took this pun, and he ran for, 40 years with it, all right, and people bought it. Right? People ran with this thing. They took it up, and it does remind me of. Do you know when P.T. Barnum, right, created his circus?
The circus man.
What?
You know, the circus man.
Yeah, the circus guy. He created the circus, right? And people asked him, "Are people actually going to come to your circus? Are you going to sell this thing to people? People are going to come to this?" And you know his response. There's a sucker born every minute. Right? Whenever I read Lacan, I think the same thing. Right? Sucker born every minute. Okay. Right. Now, right, P.T. Barnum aside, right? The idea is you have a desire fundamentally characterized by lack. Okay? Which means that we live a fundamental lack. Right? That our lives are a process of trying to make up for, discover, come to terms with, be at one with something that we can't possibly be at one with. And from difference and repetition, right, you can see that it's hard to imagine anything further from Deleuze's thought than that. Right? Deleuze's thought is about creation, right? Creation, excess spilling over, not about lack. Right? So what they do, right, is they take the concept of desire. In other words, they appropriate it from Lacan. Right?
Appropriate.
Yeah, but right, they turn it against psychoanalytic thought. And they say desire is not about lack. Desire is about production. Right? He says, they say desire's everywhere and everywhere productive. Right? The question is not what does desire lack, the question was what does desire produce. And so desire for them, in Anti-Oedipus, right, desire becomes the fundamental productive concept. Everything, right, is a force of desire. Now, if it begins to sound like the virtual, right, it should, right? It's not constructed exactly the same way, but it's got the idea of desire as fundamentally productive would be close to the idea of the virtual as, right, as productive and creative. Now, I want to start weaving in these concepts, right? But what I want you to see first, right, is as we think about it, as you think about this, right, Anti-Oedipus, right, the intervention into a particular context is important, right? That term desire, which is appears at the outset of the book, right, which structures everything that happens afterwards, right, is chosen precisely because it's an intervention into a particular debate or a particular intellectual context in which they're taking a term and reworking it to have it, in some sense, do the opposite of what, right, the context was saying it did. Right? Desire is not about psychoanalytic lack, it is about production. Okay? All right, now, so far, okay, or do you want to ask anything at this point? Go ahead, Steve.
But is it somehow, is it connected to the concept from Nietzsche, the will to power?
Yes, it is. It's connected to a lot of. No, you're right, Steve. It's connected to Nietzsche because they're coming out of Nietzsche, right? But the reason I was focusing on psychoanalysis is because in this particular text, right, what they're doing is, right, Nietzsche's behind everything, right? But in this particular text, the intervention that they make uses that concept because it's a response to that intellectual context, right? But the idea of will to power is right is certainly there. Okay. Question: do I want to say anything more about that right now? Let me hold it. Then maybe we come back. Okay. But yeah, it's there. Thomas.
Also, I have this question, but desire in this way is not only from the subject, it is everywhere, I understand.
Yes.
So desire is not connected to anyone, it could be floating around.
Yes.
Represented, for instance, by machines, for instance.
Yes. Exactly.
Yes, okay. And then I think it sounds a little like a Foucault concept of power, because power is also everywhere and is productive too.
Good.
You see?
Yes.
Yes.
Hold that thought for me, because let me talk a bit about machines and then abstract machines, which is I think the point closest to Foucault is abstract machines. Okay, but let me run through machines first, right, and then go there, and then come back. Okay. All right. So they talk about machines, right? They say desire expresses itself through machines, right? And right again, machines and the reading system, not a metaphor. Okay. Now, when they use the term machine, they say what they mean by a machine is what is defined by its connections. Right. So they use, for instance, right? They say a mouth machine is connected to a breast machine. Okay, right? That everything is a matter of machines connecting to other machines. They say the connections are binary, but we got to be. It doesn't have to just be like that, okay? Right? I mean, you can have another machine connecting these way, but all of the connections are between some machine and some other machine, okay? But if we're looking at things as machines, we are looking at what I could call the pre-individual level, okay? In other words, much of what happens, right? Much of what gets produced not by a subject, a person making a decision and then doing something, but below the level of consciousness in which various machines are connecting up to various other machines. Right? Now, what are machines? Right? Machines are just things that produce things, right? They produce things in connection with other things, right? And the notion of desire then is tied to the notion of machines, right? Machines, right? And they call them, sometimes they call them desiring machines, right? And by desiring machines, what do they mean? They mean some machines that produce, because remember, desiring machines don't desire, it's not lack, right? Right? Desiring machine, because desire is productive, is a machine that produces. Right? So you have all kinds of different connections among different things, right? Right. Remember the rhizome? Right. Think rhizome, right? All kinds of connections between all kinds of different things. And those connections between those different things, right, are productive. Right? They produce. Right? And when they produce, right, what do they produce? They produce our reality. Right? Now go back to difference and repetition, right? And think of when Deleuze said that much of what happens, right, in the virtual actualizing self is not a matter of consciousness, it happens below the level of consciousness. Right? They're taking up that thought. Okay? So they think of reality, right? All around, it's an ontology, right? An ontology is characterized through machinic production. Right? Various intersections among various machines that produce, right, various things. Okay? So, right, let's just say, right, that, I mean, one way to think of it biologically, right, is that, this is a machine, meets the mouth machine, right, it's going to interact with the stomach machine, right, and then there's going to be a flow, right, could be when the urine machine, right, starts taking over, and then that flow is going to go someplace else, right. Now think of the machines, keep following them, right. Right, so what's going to happen is that there's going to be a flow down through, down through the sewage into the sea, and then more is going to get produced, right? But it's productive, and they talk about flows, right? Machines work by flows, things getting produced, right? And a lot of it is below the level of consciousness, right? And that should remind us of the idea of the virtual actualizing self, oftentimes below the level of consciousness. There's always more going on, right, than we can imagine. And Steve, make one comment and come back your way. Because now, Thomas, this is what I thought you were going to ask. I want to come back to the email, right? Thomas raised in the email the question of, well, this is how things work, right? What is the role of agency for Deleuze? Choice and agency, right? And I have to say that Deleuze is not terribly impressed by agency, right? And I think what he's going to say is this, right? It's not that we have no effect. He says the subject is produced alongside everything else, right? But rather, so much of what we do and so much of what gets produced is something that we're unaware of, right? Or that happens in a way behind our backs, right? And agency can only, conscious agency can only take care of part of it. That doesn't mean we can't do anything. I mean, one of the things that we do is we open ourselves to possibilities, right? If we realize that we're sort of, the froth on the sea, right? Then we can open ourselves to the sea in ways that we might not have before, right? But that's opening yourself to things that are beyond you, right? So the notion of conscious agency is not one that plays a central role for him. And you can see, given his ontology, right, why it doesn't, right? By the way, coming back, that's also a Nietzschean thought, right? That for Nietzsche, right, the forces in the will to power work in such a way, right, that what Nietzsche said, that free will is the illusion of slaves, right? Good, now jump in.
No, I was just thinking, but machines are actual? Or the different...
Good.
The design machines, are they also actual, or are they...
Yes.
driving the process?
It's a good question because now it's a question of how directly we can map. Okay, right? And I would argue that I believe the machines are actual, right? And what happens is, in their actual functioning, right, they actualize virtual forces, right? And one way, right, to think about this now, and again, now, Steen, this is a rough mapping, and I don't want to give too much to this, right? Is that the machines themselves produce, right? And they produce because, right, the desire, which is virtual within them, right, is a productive force that acts through them. Okay. I don't know how far I would press that, right? I see that analogy there, right? And that way I see desire as virtual and machines as actual, right? And if we keep going with that, right, then you can
say desire is virtual?
Right. Desire is virtual, the machines, the design machines is actual, okay? Now, if we see it that way, right, then what happens is, right, that we see the machines as producing through various intensities, right, that characterize them, that get actualized through them, okay? So I'm tempted to go that way. Well, it's the only reason I'm hesitating is I don't know if that's just too clean a mapping, right? I can see the ideas there, but it's possible, right, that they're taking some of these ideas and not mapping as directly as I've just said, right? But I'm fairly comfortable in saying the machines are actual, right? I mean, the cup is actual, the water is actual, right? And what happens is in producing, right, well, if we're going to use the terms we used last time, what are they producing? Well, we might say this, that right, in the tilting of the glass, right, a certain intensity gets created, right, and that intensity gets actualized when the water actually goes down, the water actually flows out of the cup, right? So we might see it that way, right? Yeah. Alan, jump in.
Yeah. Speaking about agency, would it be in the spirit of Deleuze to speak about a person as a machine?
I would say yes, but, okay? And here's the but. We can see the notion of machines happening on a variety of different levels, okay? Right. He often talks about machines at the sub-individual level, right? We talked about, those are our examples, right? But it is possible, right, and this is when we get to the abstract machine, we're going to see this, right? It's possible to talk about it not at the sub-individual level, but at the individual level, or inter-individual level, right? Now, if we talk about it that way, then, Alan, we see the person as a machine connected to other machines, right? But we can even kick it up a level, right? And see social machines connected to other machines. So the state is connected to other states, right? Or corporations are connected to states, which are connected to other corporations, right? So, and those would be machines. So one of the characteristics of thinking in terms of machine is that it is indifferent as to whether you're thinking sub-individually, which is the examples they used mostly, inter-individually, which would be your example. Now, person as machine connected to other people, other machines, right? Or like in English we say supra, above, right? Supra individually, right? Right. So right, sub-individually, super-individually, and inter-individually, and we can think machinically at all of these different levels, right? And that's why I said yes, but, okay? So, because we don't want to think, here's the fundamental level. These are the machines and everything else is simply built from them, okay? It's not a reduction, right? But the idea is we can think it through at least three different levels, okay? By the way, that's also true of his thought in general. We haven't focused on that, but that's true of his thought in general.
No.
You good?
I'm just scratching.
Okay, see.
But I'm curious, but could you say in a way that non-machine? Because if you're reading somebody like Manuel Deleuze,
Right?
it seems that he has like an ontology of assemblages. That everything is like, and everything is an assemblage.
Yes. No, I said that's what I said. I said yes, but.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. No, I think that's.
Because it's difficult to think something not being an assemblage if you like follow this
Yeah.
through.
No, that's right. But the thing is, we can think of assemblages at different levels.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So when I say yes, but yes, we can think of people's machines. But what I don't want to do is think we can isolate which these are the actual machines and not those other things, or those other things are reducible to this. Okay. So it's that we think of machines at different levels, right? Not that we think of it at not that we ask the question. Yeah, but which are the real machines, right? Right, because that, I think Deleuze resists that idea. What he wants to do is say, no, we can think machinically here, we can think machinically here, we can think machinically here, right? So I think we agree, right? Yeah, okay. So, right, but now, from there, you use the word assemblage, right? So now we know, right, an assemblage is a set of connections of machines, right? There's Jane Bennett wrote a book, Vibrant Matter, and in it she has some really nice descriptions of assemblages. Right? She talks about a blackout that happened, a big blackout that happened, of course, the northeast United States, and she talks about the assemblage that created the blackout. Right? Because people say, well, what created the blackout? Well, there was a bolt of lightning on a particular transformer. Right? But, as she points out, a lot of other things had to be assembled together for this blackout to occur. Right? So it was the particular ways in which the network was assembled. Okay, which was connected in certain ways because, and she explained, and I can remember this right, the structure of how electricity works, right? How it leads from one thing to another, right? All of which, by the way, was connected to a set of U.S. policies about how the electrical grid is going to be built, right? So there were sort of sets of connections going on, and all of these formed an assemblage, right? And under certain conditions, that assemblage produced what? It produced a blackout, right? So Bennett's got a nice set of descriptions of particular assemblages and how they work. Okay. Okay. So we see assemblage. I want to go to the abstract machine in the body of that organism. But yeah, Alan, jump in.
It's just a comment about the blackout in New York. You know what happened? What it produced? 9 months later.
Oh yeah. But by the way, this also is true of this is part of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Oddly enough, right? I was in 1988. I was on the human rights delegation in Palestine, and the Israelis have a habit of putting curfews, right? If there's any disturbance, they put on a curfew, right? And they put on curfews. They'll put them on for weeks at a time. They'll take a village and put it on a curfew sometimes for 2 weeks, right? And as one person pointed out, who was in a village that had been under curfew for 2 weeks, he said, "Look, we're under curfew for 2 weeks. We're in our house. Not much to do, right? So the Israelis put us on a curfew, and then they complain about the demographic problem. There's too many Palestinians, right? They says they put us on a curfew. We're just going to be. They say there's just nothing more to do except produce some more Palestinians, right? That's an assemblage that works in a particular way. Okay. All right. So right. We have these concepts. Are we okay so far, right? And you've seen the Deleuzian influence, but I want to come back to something I said to Steen before. I want us to see the influence of difference and repetition. I don't want it in these cases, I think the mapping is really clean, right? In Desire, it's fairly clean, but this is an interactive book, right? So we don't want to say it's just difference and repetition translated into other language, okay? Here I think it is, right? Here somewhat, but here I think I'd be careful to say saying too much about that. Okay? But, right, you have machines. Now, think of those machines interacting at the supra-individual level, right? Corporations and interacting with states, right? Interacting with NGOs, interacting with various other things, right? Now, at that level, there can be certain themes that characterize the type of interaction that occurs. And those themes that characterize the type of interaction that occur then will somehow can resonate across. Right? And as they resonate across bringing their themes from one place to another, right? You can get a certain set of themes, theme or set of themes, that characterize a variety of different practices. Okay? And the way Deleuze reads Foucault's concept of discipline, and the way one might read the concept of neoliberalism, is as a theme that could characterize with resonance across a variety of different machinic connections. Right? And when you have a theme, right, that's characterized across a variety of machinic connections, right, that's an abstract machine. Okay? Right? It's the abstraction is neoliberalism, right? But you can see it occurring across a variety of machinic connections. Or the abstraction is discipline, and you see it across a variety of different. And Deleuze called discipline an abstract machine. Now, so far so good, right? Now, Thomas, I still have your question about the relationship to Foucault and all this, right? I'm going to hold the body without organs for 1 minute and then come back to that, right? Let me do that, body without organs, and maybe take a quick break, right? Then we'll do the last part, okay? Okay.
I'm just thinking of one thing. It might be an appendix to this machine description, because Deleuze has this concept he calls the individual, not the individual, but the individual.
Yeah.
Because we are like engaged in several machines, infinite number of machines, and we can name some of them. But the point is that all these machines together makes the person. So that would be also to your question of could you call a person a machine? And that would be more like you can call a person a lot of machines.
You could.
Yeah.
But now, at that point, you're calling you're looking at the level of the sub-individual, right? And then seeing the individual as a product of a set of machines. But you could also look at the individual level.
Yes.
And see the individual as a machine itself.
Yes.
In engagement with other machines.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And we want to see this as a complex, right? As in its full complexity, where you're analyzing some things as opposed to others, right? So when Foucault analyzes discipline, for instance, his analysis of discipline he didn't claim all of reality is characterized by discipline. He said there's an important theme characterizing our culture. That's the theme of discipline. Okay? Right.
I have an annoying question. Maybe. Is it okay?
Let me answer Thomas and come back, okay? Because I want to do it's probably a good point to do the Foucault thing at this point. Right, so you asked, right? Deleuze thinks that he sees himself as characterizing Foucault. Okay? And
Deleuze
in his
thinks that he sees himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that was too many heads. Deleuze sees himself as characterizing Foucault. Okay? And he has a book on Foucault where a lot of this gets laid out in Deleuze kind of terms, right? My general view is that Deleuze's book on Foucault is a really good introduction to Deleuze.
Yeah.
Right? Not as good an introduction to Foucault. Right? The reason is that Foucault, I think, is operating, is avoiding ontology, right? And I think he's avoiding ontology because he wants specifically to be focusing on, right, a contingent history characterized by practices that intersect in certain ways, right, and produce other things, okay? Now, one can look here and see that, but this is a very, I want to say abstract, not abstract, right, an abstract reading. You could see Foucault through this, but you can see a lot of other things as well, okay? Because he's doing ontology, right? So while Foucault is a conversational partner here, I don't like the idea of saying, well, okay, this is the ontology that Foucault would have, right? I mean, for my money, the ontology that Foucault has is an ontology of practices and their intersection. That's his ontology, okay? That this stuff can be seen in a Foucaultian way, but need not so. If we go specifically to power, right? If desire produces, it's an ontology that produces everywhere, right? Foucault talks about power in a very specific way. Actions constraining other actions, okay? Right, so, right, when I pick up the glass and drink, right, that's desire for Deleuze, it's not power for Foucault, right? So, although one can see it, I'm hesitant to do that mapping, right? I think that doesn't see Foucault in his specificity, right? Which is what I think Deleuze also didn't do in the Foucault book. I don't think he saw Deleuze in the specificity because he was too busy seeing Deleuze, right? Yeah.
He didn't see Foucault in his specificity.
Yeah, he didn't see Foucault. I'm sorry, Foucault because he was seeing Deleuze.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Steve, now.
I want to ask you about the status of the abstract.
The abstract machines, yeah.
Would you call it virtual or actual?
That's a good question. And I think there's a third possibility, which is
because it's a little bit
which is
like
neither.
it's a little bit like the Foucaultian term. I think like a diagram.
Yeah,
It's a little bit like the diagram, and he's also.
It's a lot like a diagram. Yeah.
Because the reason I said it was an annoying question
Mhm.
is because somehow it's not really actual, but if
Right.
it's virtual, there's then there is a little bit like a structure in the virtual, like I've been asking you about many times.
Yeah. I'm tempted to say neither, right? Because, Steve, what I'm tempted to say is that what abstract machines are, right, is the product of a bunch of machines, a thematic characterization of the product of a bunch of machines operating.
Yeah.
So the actual and the virtual are operating, right, in and through the machines, the specific machines. So, if the abstract machine was something that, as a machine itself, right, actually had productive work, right, it would be, I think, a bit strange, right? So I think what the abstract machine does, it characterizes the themes of various particular machines working, okay? Now, once those machines work and resonate that way, right, it's likely to keep reproducing itself, okay? But it reproduces itself not because there's another machine there, right, but because these machines themselves, right, form their own ways of producing and reproducing themselves. See what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think of it more as a thematic conception of what's going on in the machines than a separate machine itself, right? And if we think of it that way, then it's neither virtual nor actual, right? It's characterization of something going on somewhere else.
But the reason I'm wondering about it is because I don't know if it's but it's also something with Foucault like a discipline. It can sort of actualize itself in various spaces, maybe not in all spaces.
Yeah, but Foucault, when it actualizes itself, it's because you can trace the rules and things that are working to do it.
Yeah.
So
And
even
they're not
then,
exactly the same. The hospital
Right.
is not exactly like the army barracks, which is not exactly like.
but they're all intersecting and interacting with each other in ways that can be traced,
Yeah.
right? And that's why there's nothing outside, transcendent that's making it happen. Alan, jump in.
Yeah, if an abstract machine is a concept, then it's actual. If the abstract machine is characterized as an idea, then it's virtual.
I would put it this way though, because there's two levels here, right? There is the machine itself and the concept of the machine. Okay, so right, the concept, abstract machine, is a concept and an actual concept.
Yep.
Okay, but the question is the thing that it is characterizing an actuality, a virtuality, or something else, right? And I would say that what it is characterizing, that's an actual concept. What it's characterizing is a theme that characterizes, the theme that gets applied across different actual, we could say, actual/virtual machines. Okay? Good. All right. Body without organs, then we break?
You need a coffee machine?
Yeah, coffee machine. What's that?
A quick break?
A quick break? We'll take a break?
A break machine, quick.
Right.
Break machine.
Yeah.
5-minute break.
Take a 5-minute break, and come back, and then we'll do these.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. So, the term body without organs makes its
What? Excuse me.
What?
What?
body without organs. Sorry, my bad. Right. Body without organs. Right. Right. It makes its first real appearance in Anti-Oedipus. Reappears in 1,000 Plateaus, but it looks different there. And even in Anti-Oedipus, it's a strange concept. Right? One way to take it up, and this will allow for a number of readings, but not all of the readings, that all of the uses they give to the term, would be that the body without organs would be the body before it's organized in particular ways. So it would be the virtual. Okay? One way to take up the body without organs is it's simply the virtual. Right? It's before the body gets organized in various ways, right? There's still matter there. You think, remember Deleuze in Difference and Repetition, he uses the term, the world is an egg, right? So the egg, before it becomes anything in particular, right, it's a set of intensive virtual connections. Right? One way to think of the body without organs is that way. By the way, the term comes from Artaud, the French poet Artaud, and he used it in some of his poetry. So that's one way to think about it. The problem is that's a very straightforward way to take up the body without organs, and not everything that they say is in keeping with this, because sometimes they'll say that, let's say, after the machines are filled, like let's say the infant body is filled, it returns to a body without organs, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes they seem to talk about the body without organs as the virtual before the process, and then they sometimes talk about it as something empty after a process, and it's unclear, right, what the relationship is between the two. And as if that weren't enough, right, in 1,000 Plateaus they distinguish at least 3 different types of bodies without organs. Right? They talk about the full body without organs, the empty body without organs, and the catatonic body without organs. Right. And
Weeps.
what? No, it's the one in the middle. I can't remember that one. When I read Anti-Oedipus, I usually try to stick with the first idea, because I think it's one that makes the most sense in the most context. The body without organs is just the virtual body that gets organized in different ways, right? But we can think of that, remember, as the body without organs if we're thinking machinically, not simply as an individual human body, right? But there can be a set of relationships, right, that haven't emerged into anything yet, right? And that could be a body without organs as well. Okay. But Mila, I think you had asked about the body without organs. When I went back, I was thinking about it and looking at different things, and then I remembered why it was that I don't like talking about the body without organs, right? Because they give it several different meanings that don't always seem to fit together. Okay. Now, I was going to turn from there, switch over here, right? Say just a bit about affect and then talk a little bit more about time, right? But before that, are we okay with this set of concepts? Right. That's where are we not okay?
No, but in an okay way.
Okay. Okay, so you're not okay, but you're meta okay. Okay. That's all I ask. Meta okay. Right. Anything we want to linger over here? Good? Okay. Yeah? Okay. All right, so turn to affect, right? From the Spinoza book, right? And Thompson, I know you've studied this a decent amount, right? Have you studied the Spinoza book a good bit too? Right. And I mean, you guys probably do as well or better than I can, all right, on affect. Do you guys want to say something about it?
I am.
comfortable to ask me questions, right? But when it comes to asking you to do a little work in my class, this is what I get from you.
Are you Jewish?
No, but I know a guy. Okay. Thomas, you had put this in the question, right? You said he talks about affects and power to be affected. Okay.
Yeah.
Right? And he talks about that, right? And that's in the Spinoza book as well. Right? There actually, just to be clear, there are two Spinoza books, right? One written before Difference and Repetition, one written afterwards. The major one's the one before. But Spinoza talks about bodies being affected, right, in various ways, and he talks about different kinds of affections. Right? There are joyous affections, right, and what's the sad affects, right? Joyous affects and sad affects. Okay. Now, the way I take this up, and again, I'm going to say something, but if either of you could spend more time think that I'm off base on this, just jump right in with it. Okay. In thinking about this, if we think about the capacity to be affected, the idea is that there are bodies, right? And for Spinoza, those bodies are two-sided, right? They are thought and corporeal, right? Spinoza has what's sometimes called the parallelism. Whatever happens in thought happens in the body, right? Whatever happens in the body happens in thought. They're together, which is in contrast to Descartes, for whom these things are separate. Okay, so they're together, right? So the body can be affected in certain ways that increase its power. Those are the joyous affects. Right? And for Deleuze, the increase in power will be the increase in the ability to create. Okay? They can also be affected in such a way as to decrease their power of action. Right? Those would be the sad affects, and it decreases the power to create. Right? So far, so good, right? I want to make another. That's the part I feel comfortable with. Right? The next move you may want to correct me on. Okay. Right. So, right. If we have that, right, then the question is, right, can there be an increase or a decrease, not simply in the power to act, right? Increase the power to act, joyous affects, decrease the power to act, right? Sad affects. Can there be an increase or a decrease in the power to be affected? Right? Not simply the power to act, but the power to be affected. Okay? Now, let me hold on to this distinction. Right? Right? The power to be affected is the capacity, right, to be affected in such a way that you can act, you can be creative, right, or to take away your creativity. That's the power to be affected by sad affects or by joyous affects or sad affects. Right? But the question is, can there be an increase or a decrease in the power to be affected itself? More susceptible to joyous affects, more susceptible to sad affects. Okay? And I take it, again, here's where I feel on shakiest ground with this stuff. I take it that Deleuze's reading of Spinoza is that the answer to that question is yes, right? That there are greater powers, not simply greater powers once you are affected, but greater power in some cases to be affected, right? One way or the other. And that there can be greater openness to that, right? And that when Deleuze keeps quoting that Spinoza line that he loves, we don't know of what a body is capable, right? That what he thinks he's referring to is that there can be greater or lesser, not just powers to act, but powers to be affected, right? Now, let me ask, does that seem fair to you guys? Mm-hmm. Okay? Good. Okay, good. So, and now looking at it that way, we can bring it back to difference and repetition, right? To bring, if we're thinking of it this way, what we're thinking is not the power to be affected, right? Is but the joyous affects are affects that will help us create something that is new, right? And for Spinoza, right, because he thinks of the world as a whole, right? Right, because it's a monist, right? There's a single substance, right? That single substance we can think of as the actual virtual reality, right? And that single substance, right, has what Spinoza calls attributes, but Deleuze actually is not so keen on attributes. It's the modes. It's ways, forms of expression, right, of substances. One point, I think it's in difference in repetition, where Deleuze says that he wants to get a Spinozism without attributes, right? But the idea is that you have one substance that expresses itself in different modes, and because it can express itself in different modes, there are different powers to be affected, and now we can see, the actual modes, right, arising out of, right, a virtual / actual substance. Okay? Right. Okay, right. But now, this issue of time, we've seen it a bit, right, in difference and repetition. We saw it in the eternal return, right, with the idea that what returns is difference, right? What returns is, right, virtual possibility, right, and not identities. Identities come and go, right, but there's always becoming, right? That's a part and a central part in difference and repetition of Deleuze's concept of time. Okay? There's another large part that comes from his reading of the philosopher Bergson. Okay? And Bergson believes, right, that the past is not something that is no longer there, right, but the past always remains there. In other words, the past is not a current moment that no longer exists. The past keeps abiding in one way or the other in the present. Right? Right. Now, Bergson uses the concept of a cone for this, which is going to bring in some stuff we probably don't need terribly much to worry about. But if you think of it this way, right? That every actualization affects the structure of the virtual. And therefore, when you have had an actualization, you can never not have had it. That history remains there. I'm going to use the word sedimented in a certain way. So that, to give an everyday example, or example from conversational work, right? When you have when you see somebody, right, you are working with somebody who's never a blank slate, right, who has a certain past. Right? That past is with them in their present, and it is with them in their present in a way, right, that still affects the way they project into the future. Right? So you can never, in any conversational work, I assume it, or never, or almost never works, say, yeah, well, forget that, right? Let's act as though none of that stuff ever happened, all right? Right? So the question is not, right, how you move to the future forgetting the past, but how you carry that which is still always there, right, into the future. Right? And for you guys, the great novelist, I say my favorite novelist, Faulkner, William Faulkner, right? Right. One famous quote of Faulkner is, "The past isn't over; it's not even past." Right? That the past is always there in one way or another. Right? And therefore, the past, Deleuze sometimes uses the word, it doesn't exist. But he sometimes uses the word, it subsists, or it insists. Okay? Right, so it's affecting, it doesn't exist in the way the present does, but it still has this power to affect. Okay?
Subsist
or insist. Right, and I sort of like the image of the insist, the past, like it's insisting itself. Right? So he says the past subsists or insists. Right? And if we think of it that way, right, then we are in a present, always in a present, that is characterized, right, by the way in which it carries its past, right, and projects itself, right, toward its future. Now, I'm gonna add a wrinkle here, right? Are we okay so far? Yeah, good. Good. Okay. Yeah. Now, the way in which the past exists, or subsists, or insists, right, is not by being there in the way the present is, but by somehow having an effect in the unfolding of the present, right? There's another way we might put this thought, right? That the past is a virtuality within the present that is characterized by the forms of actualization that expresses itself, that's better, in the forms that actualization takes. Okay? Now, Stephen, we'll come back. If that's the case, if we think of time that way, right, then it's also a way of seeing why the virtual and the actual always stay connected, right? Because anything that happens in the virtual is going to have some effect, because these are tied together, right? So we might think of the past as an aspect of the virtual, right, that has its effect on the actual in the way it subsists or insists, right? And to think the past, he goes to Bergson, right? Because Bergson says that the present is, the way that Bergson puts, simply the most concentrated, right, point of the past. It's a neat thought, right? Okay, now we've got this. As we were leaving, Betsy, jump in. Yeah.
We went very fast over this thing with ethics.
No. I haven't did this yet.
Okay.
No, this is where I'm going.
Okay,
Right?
good.
No. We haven't done any of this yet. This is the last thing I want to do.
With affects.
Oh, affect.
Yeah.
No, I can linger over affect if you like. I did go over affect.
Yeah.
But it'll make you sad.
Because I have a question.
Well, raise it.
Okay. Because it's very clear with Spinoza when he's talking about affects, the joyous affects and the sad affects, that this is also something, and I think in the small book from Spinoza,
Yeah.
I don't remember if it's the one after Difference and Repetition, he's even writing
It is. Yeah.
feeling, he's saying affects, or
Yeah.
he's making the distinction between affection and affects.
Yeah.
And he's writing feeling
Mm-hmm.
as in question, not in Valentin and Pantis.
Brackets.
In brackets.
Yeah, practice. Yeah.
So it's very clear this has something to do with like what we call feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But in other places in his authorship, he's talking about, especially when he's talking about animals. I think it's in the Thousand Plateaus, like the tick, von Uxworth's tick.
Yeah.
He says that the tick is defined by three affects. That it moves in the world.
Yeah.
By three affects, and also he also has an example of that about the ontology that the plow horse is much closer to the ox than the racehorse because of its affects. What is defining the plow horse?
Mm-hmm.
It's much closer to the ox because what it can do.
Right.
What the body can do, as opposed to this. And somehow I never really managed to make the connection from Spinoza, where I was talking about affects as a feeling, and talking in the same term about what defines a structure by its affects. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I'm not sure I'm able to answer it. The reason being that this specific, there are specific differences, but I have to look back to see. before I can say terribly much about it. I can say probably something, but it's going to be very general. Okay, which is that the capacity to be affected, I think, for Deleuze is virtual, right? So there will be for the ox, right, the tick, right, different capacities to be affected, right, because they have different virtual fields out of which they're coming. Okay. I'm tempted to say, although I may be wrong on this, right? I'm tempted to say that feeling is actual, or capacity to be affected is virtual. Okay. So the three affects might be for the tick. Again, I have to look back to see, right? But the three affects would be, right, the various capacities to be affected, ways in which, ways in which intensities can express themselves for the tick. Something, maybe along that line. I think I would go any further than I'm really speculating.
But because I always, and you know, I was Brian Asumi, he's been doing a lot of work with the affect studies and things.
Yeah.
And it's always the missing link that I'm looking for.
Spinoza.
How do they connect these things?
Yeah.
How do they, you know? Because it's like he's talking about two different things, and for me it's not clear, and I don't know who to ask.
Yeah.
About this.
I don't know. I say I could look back. When I get back to the States, if you email me, I'll look back through the text and try to come up with it.
Yeah, it would be great.
Yeah. Just email me. Don't mind. All right. Because I'd have to look back to see how I would sort that out. Right. Because I haven't been asked that question before.
And
So
please include the whole group in this.
Yeah, if you're nice. Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay.
He did say please.
She did say please, right? Right. Which has no equivalent in Danish, I understand, right? Although there was some discussion.
Oh yeah, it has.
What is the equivalent?
Vær venlig,
Vær venlig?
eller vær sød. To be sweet, vær sød inkluderer os. Be nice to
He's so
include.
nice.
It would be nice, right? Yeah, no, we have all that. But if I want to say, may I please have a cup of coffee? How do I say? Where's the please? How do I say the please part?
The exact word doesn't exist.
Yeah, the exact
But the virtual word.
word. Yeah.
It's not the way you actualize that.
I'll give you that.
I don't know if it's not.
Okay, appreciate it.
Okay. Okay, so we have this picture, okay? And I say I had this set of concepts, and as we were leaving last Thursday, on the way out the door, there's one more, right? You know, if you get a chance, could you talk about ethics and morality, right? So I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, as I'm putting the chart together, I'm thinking, yeah, this is all of it, right? The ethics and morality bit, right? It concerns the entire structure, right? So let me just say something about ethics and morality for Deleuze, okay? But it does have to do with the whole picture itself, right? And Deleuze makes a distinction between ethics and morality, and it is one of those rare places where Deleuze seems entirely clear about what he means, right? And the distinction he makes, again, is very, I want to say it's as deeply Nietzschean probably as anything that he does, right? He says of morality that morality is a set of rules that are supposed to guide behavior. What characterizes those rules, and this is crucial for him, it goes back to stuff we talked about before, is that they're transcendent. Right? They come from outside us, are imposed upon us, and tell us the ways we ought to act. And Deleuze says what he's interested in is not a morality, but what he calls an ethics. Now, when we talk about morality and ethics, there's so many different ways those two are distinguished, and sometimes people just say they're the same thing. So, with this distinction that I'm going to draw, we want to think of as a technical Deleuze distinction. This is the way he draws the distinction. Okay? So he says what goes under the name of morality is often a transcendent set of rules that we are supposed to abide by. ethics, on the other hand, doesn't concern a set of transcendent rules, but asks, what can we create? So it works not transcendently, but immanently, right? That distinction we had before. It works immanently, from inside. So the ethical question for Deleuze is, if we took it broadly, the whole ontology, not just concerning people, right? What can be created? The way I have taken that question for Deleuze, in my interpretation of Deleuze, is when it concerns people, right? We might think of the question not as the question of what might be created, but the question of how might one live. Right? That becomes the question that characterizes an immanent, not imminent, but immanent ethics. So that for Deleuze, the project he's tied up with is a project that, to my mind, seeks to force or to open the question of how one might live. If we think of ourselves in terms of this ontology, then rather than asking the question, what are the rules to which I should submit? It opens up the possibility of thinking of ourselves as experiments with resources beyond what we can often imagine and beyond what we can consciously reflectively be aware of. So that with this ontology, we are positioned to ask ourselves, right, what can be created, or how might I live? And I think for Deleuze, that's the ethical question. Right? Not the question of what rules I should follow, but the question of how might I be able to live? Right? What can I make through my living? Right?
But can't you say that he shows how to go in that direction? For instance, through the Spinozian work, and where Spinoza points out the joyful affections, instead of the sad affections. So go for the joyful affections, and at the same time, this points, or this makes this connection to Nietzsche, and his
active.
His ambition to find out how to become active.
Right.
So to become active for Nietzsche would simulate for Spinoza becoming joyful, and would together, the two of them together, would form like an ethic.
I'm gonna see this in a different frame.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I think when Deleuze looks at Nietzsche and sees active forces dominating, what do active forces do? They create. Deleuze says they go to the limit of what they can do. They create. Active forces create. That's what they do.
Yes.
I think that he's going to see the same thing with Spinoza. Right? A joyful affect, right, increases, right, the power of creativity. So I think it's not that joy plus active, right, equals Deleuze, but rather Deleuze believes in creation, and he sees Spinoza articulating creation one way, Nietzsche articulating creation another way.
Yes.
But it's about creation, right? What is it that can be created? Or how can we live in such a way that we think in terms of, we consider our lives in terms of creation?
Yes, and becoming active then means doing the immanence of the ethics.
Exactly.
Instead of the transcendence of morality.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's his critique of God is God's the moral creature. God sets the principles and says you've got to abide by them. Nietzsche says no. The question is, right, how can I release my active forces? Which Deleuze interprets, what can I create? Right? Yeah.
it's a funny ethics because if that's all there is, I can create a lot of things, like something even more horrible than a nuclear bomb.
Mhm.
Yeah. I can create a lot of nasty things.
Yeah, and the question then becomes,
That
what's
would
the
be different,
criteria?
that would be
Yeah.
completely new kind of malice.
Mhm. Yeah, I have argued that Deleuze needs a wider normative framework. Yeah. And I think he's suggestive here of something that's really significant. It's not clear to me you ever actually get away from this. It's not clear to me that you can get away from this.
No.
Right. I think this has a role to play, and I've argued that. Right. I think this has a role to play. Right. That Deleuze is suggestive in important ways. Right. But I don't think that his work is going to stand in such a way that it can evade moral, what I would say traditional moral questions, right? And I try to write about how that might be. Alan wants to say something about something that you said in conversation with me earlier. There's also questions about his relation to history, how he takes up history and things like that. But go ahead.
No, I would just say that the way that you explains Deleuze's view on ethics, his ethics actually has some kind of meta-moral. So the rules are here, how to create. So there are certain rules, or meta-rules, which I would say are some kind of moral rules about how to behave or act ethically. Is the rule?
Yes. Yeah, there's a. No, you're right. There's a complication here, but the question is whether it's worth talking about. No, he's got a norm he endorses, right? And that norm is creation is better than not creation.
That's it.
Right. Yeah, and that norm is certainly there. And because one wonders why you'd bother doing all this ontology if you didn't have the norm. And there are, and I'll just end with this. There are these debates about the status of his ontology. I think I may have mentioned this before. There's a Deleuze scholar, Konstantin Bundas, right? Konstantin Bundas, Boundas. He was he was the guy who brought Deleuze to the English-speaking world, right? He was, when I went down to Athens for the conference, he'd organized a series of conferences. This was his last conference, and he and I have had debates about the status of Deleuze's philosophy for years, right? And the debate is this, right? He thinks that Deleuze is engaged in a real ontology, and Deleuze believes this is how the world works. Okay? Right? And it's kind of nice that the world works this way because it allows for creativity. Right? My view is that Deleuze doesn't really care whether the world actually works like this. That the point of creating the ontology is to open up, right, the norm of creation. That if we think this way, we're more likely to investigate and experiment. So that my view is that that he creates the ontology for normative reasons. Okay? Bundas' view is he creates the ontology for ontological reasons because he's trying to get reality right.
But is that reactive or active?
Which?
What Deleuze he does. If he does create this
Yeah.
just to make everything upside down, actually to make us think in a different way.
Yeah, that would be active in a sense because he creates in order to open up something new, right?
Yeah.
So, right, but if you read Deleuze, you can find both, right? You can find moments where it looks like he's creating this for normative reasons, and moments where it looks like he's creating the ontology he believes in. So, it's not clear you resolve this. It's actually not clear that Deleuze actually raised the question himself, right, to himself, right? But, right, that's a discussion, Alan, that goes back to your question about the norms, okay? Because I see it as deeply normative, right, the ontology, right? And with that, there is, I got the thing from Andre, right? But he told me how I have to open it a special way, right? Yeah, he says, no, don't do this thing, he told me. Like if you do this, it's no good. You got to do this, right? And so, and it's really nice looking. So I will bring it out. We'll all look at this. We'll admire it,
And
right?
do this,
And then we'll consume it.
and we'll take pictures.
What?
We'll take pictures because.
Oh, there's a competition.
Yeah.
You saw that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, explain that, because I didn't see. No, because it's in Danish. I couldn't get it all.
Said that we have a competition of taking photographs of how you are presenting and eating our cake. And the winners will get, I don't know, probably a cake.
A cake?
Okay.
We go swimming.
What?
We go swimming.
With the cake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Sure.
no, I think that, no, I want to say formally, thank you so much for presenting this. It's been,
Well, thank you.